If you've ever seen a movie based off a TV show, whether it be an adaptation made years after the show ended or a direct continuation made by exactly the same people, you'll know how it usually goes. 9 times out of 10, they're bad at best and end up being ranked as some of the worst movies of the year at worst. However, that isn't always the case. On rare occasions, a movie based off a TV show can actually be good in its own right, or even serve as the perfect reflection of everything the show represented. And today I'd like to go over two movie adaptations of popular TV series that I believe did just that. But before I get started, I would just like to give my usual warning that there will be minor spoilers ahead for both movies I'll be discussing, so be sure to be on the lookout for anything you don't want ruined. This is the only time you will be warned of that. Okay, so the two movies I'd like to discuss today are the movie adaptations of SpongeBob SquarePants and South Park. Specifically, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie and South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, respectively. Now, while I have made it no secret that I am by no means an expert on these subjects, I do believe that these two movies are a very good template for how to do a good movie adaptation of a TV series with a rather large fan base. And what's even more notable about that is that they both managed to do it while taking two very different approaches. Now, to start off with the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, this has all the hallmarks for a movie adaptation that ends a TV show on film. Now, obviously, the show didn't end after this movie, but that still doesn't take away from it or make it any less good. Now, the obvious question here is, why does it work so well? Well, the answer mostly comes down to the fact that it perfectly manages to translate a TV show formula into a movie format, which is something it shares in common with the South Park movie. But to put it into perspective, SpongeBob SquarePants was an absurdist comedy show that was mostly about the laughs while the characters occasionally learned something worth learning. And all of these elements are incorporated perfectly into the movie. But what's even more important is that they didn't just take an episode of the show and stretch it to a feature length film. Instead, the stakes are a lot higher, the emotion is a lot deeper, the quest is more grueling. Plankton goes from being a credible threat, but easily defeatable, to an outright psychopath that comes inches away from total victory. And finally, SpongeBob must prove his worth and that he's a lot more than people think he is. In other words, this movie takes everything that made the show great and enhances them while also giving it qualities very much befitting of a movie adaptation. But just as importantly, it never forgets what it was at its very core. Now, of course, what did help in this case was that the writers did genuinely believe that this would be the end of the show, which allowed them to probably take more risks than they probably would have if they had known the show would continue. But in the long run, that probably still worked to the movie's benefit, allowing it to be its own thing with its own end point instead of just being a movie based off a TV show. To put it another way, this movie understood what to keep the same and what to change about the TV series to make it perfect for a big screen adaptation, allowing it to feel just like the show, but also like a real movie at the same time. And just to give another example, the 2005 movie Serenity, which was a direct movie adaptation and continuation of the TV show Firefly, followed this exact same formula to similarly great results. And then we have South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. Now this feels exactly like a feature-length episode of the TV series and does it in the best way possible. Because it's absolutely everything South Park was known for. The vulgar humor, the satire, the needlessly violent nature, and all it does differently is take advantage of the higher rating system to do what they normally couldn't get away with on the show. Basically, it stays exactly true to what its fans loved about the show, and thus the movie is, for all intents and purposes, just a bigger version of that. Now, sure, it does change some parts of the format similar to the SpongeBob movie, such as making the stakes higher or the journey to victory being tougher, but for the most part, it's a much more literal adaptation of the series, staying as close to it as possible and only making the slightest tweaks to make it more appropriate for a feature film or taking advantage of it to allow for more R-rated content. Now, what I'm trying to say here is, even though these two movies had a slightly different approach to adapting their TV shows into a feature film, both of them managed to be major successes with their fan base, to the point that it not only solidified their respective studios' decision to greenlight the continuation of both series, but made them even more popular in subsequent years with people who weren't even fans of the show at that time. Now, what both of the movie adaptations did correctly, if you haven't been able to notice it already, is that they stayed true to what their respective shows were. And that's really the most important part of adapting any story into another medium. And quite honestly, is why so many times they get it wrong. Because instead of trying to understand why any given show is popular or beloved, most of the time all they're interested in is desperately trying to recapture the magic while at the same time changing too much, which more often than not ends with nobody being happy with the final product. I mean, think about it. As I just went over, the SpongeBob Squarepants movie made quite a few changes to its format in order to make for a better movie, and it was still loved by most of the fan base. Why? Because it was still everything the fans loved about the show. It wasn't trying to replicate SpongeBob on film. It was SpongeBob, just slightly reconstructed for a movie. Now, does some of this come down to the fact that both these movies were written and directed by its show's respective creators? In all honesty, probably yes. But that doesn't mean all creators can automatically make great movie adaptations of their work, because some people can only work in a television format, and plenty of times when trying to helm a movie only makes things worse. It's not just that these creators were able to keep the integrity of their shows intact while translating them onto film, but also the fact that they knew exactly how to do it that made them work so well. And that's what more people should honestly keep in mind when deciding to make a movie adaptation of a TV show. Whether the creator of the series or not, you have to first make sure that they have the ability to translate it from one format to the other. And second, make sure that they understand why it was so popular in the first place. Anytime anything based off something beloved has followed this format, being a book adaptation, a reboot, a movie into a show, or a show into a movie, it's almost always been successful. So the fact that people don't follow this method more often only speaks volumes about where these people's priorities usually are when making these kind of adaptations and why so many of them are so bad. But the irony here is, if they just let the right people do their own thing and follow this basic format, then they'd be all the more likely to get the results they actually want while pleasing most of the fan base at the same time. Okay, that wraps this video up. So now I want to hear your opinion. Do you think the SpongeBob SquarePants movie and South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut are very good templates on how to write movies based off TV shows? Or have you seen other movies that you believe did it better? Please feel free to tell me in the comments below. And as always, thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.